Hare Krishna. Is my screen visible?
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay. We'll start with the Mangalachan. Om Majnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitamena Tasmi Sri Guru Nama Sri Chaitanya Mano Vishnu Sthapitam Yena Bhutali Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeyam Sri Guru Sri Udapatakalam Sri Guru Vaishnavamscha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunathan Vitam Stam Sajam Sadvaitam Saudutam Parjan Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Dalta Sri Vishakan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpati Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namaste Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanusuti Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vevecha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namah Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Hare Krishna. So as I've already announced in our Bhagavatam class on Tuesday, so I just wanted to conduct one complete session on Puruṣottama Yoga, chapter 15, at least before the end of Puruṣottama month. So today, this chapter 15 contains 20 verses. So today we'll cover the first 10, and on next Tuesday, we'll cover the remainder from verse 11 to 20. So next Tuesday, there will be no Bhagavatam class. The next Bhagavatam class will be on next Friday. So today we'll look at the first 10 verses. But before that, in our Sanskrit recitation class, we have actually gone through the entire chapter 15, all the 20 verses, where we saw the meters. So can anyone recite this verse and tell me what's the meter? Hare Krishna.
Not sure, Prabhu.
Okay. This is meter 8.
Okay.
So anyone want to recite this?
Can I recite, Prabhu?
Yeah. Sure.
Shri Bhagavan Vacha Urtvamulam Adashakam Ashwatang Prahur Avyayam Chandamsi Yasha Parnani Yastam Veda Savedavid.
Very good, Mataji. Thanks.
Thank you.
So this is meter 8, and in this chapter, actually in the entire Gita, we have only 2 meters, meter 8 and 11. So in this chapter, there are 20 verses in this chapter. Even in Bhakti Yoga, chapter 12, also we have 20 verses. But in chapter 12, all the verses are meter 8. Only in this chapter, we have a mixture of meter 8 and 11. So this first verse is meter 8, and the second verse is actually meter 11. So first we'll go through this verse and the purport. Then hopefully for the second verse, if possible, any one of you can recite when we get there. So the first verse, Sri Bhagavan Vacha, Uddamulam Madashakam, Ashwatam Prauravayam, Chandamsi Yasya Parani, Yastam Vedasa Vedavit. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, it is said that there is an imperishable banyan tree that has its root upward and its branches down, and whose leaves are the Vedic hymns. One who knows this tree is the knower of the Vedas. So this chapter 15 is kind of a transition into the discussion from into the discussion about the spiritual world mostly, because in the preceding chapter, that is chapter 14, it is about the three modes of material nature. And then in this chapter, chapter 15, it is about Puruṣottama yoga, the yoga of the Supreme Person. So this chapter starts with a comparison of the material world, actually sheds more light about the material world in comparison to the spiritual world. So in the first few verses, the material world is described as a reflection, of a perverted reflection of the spiritual world. And towards the middle, we'll get to see about the characteristics of the spiritual world. And then slowly, in the second half, like verse 11 and beyond, slowly it moves towards the definition of the Supreme Person. First, the material world is discussed, and it is also, Krishna also talks about why the living entities are stuck here in the material world and what we should do to get out of this material world. And then in the second half, verse 11 onwards, there's this comparison between the living entities and the Supreme Person. For the purpose, after the discussion of the importance of Bhakti Yoga, one may question, what about the Vedas? So there's also this misconception in our community that just because we have a lot of scriptures, many people think that we actually have to study everything. And because of that, since there are so many scriptures, people even use that as an excuse to not touch anything at all. For example, in some other sampradayas, they even equate the Gita, or they actually dismiss the Gita as a Gaudiya scripture, though it is actually universal, because it is not sectarian. It is meant for all living entities, not just for one particular religion, because Sanatan Dharma is about Dharma. It is not about religion. So the difference between Dharma and religion is has already been explained in the intro section to the Bhagavad Gita. Srila Prabhupada talks about the difference between Dharma and religion. So the Gita is actually like the essence of all our Vedic scriptures. Krishna has actually given the essence of everything in 700 verses, and it is actually meant for us, the unfortunate Kali Jivas, because we actually don't have the time, the luxury of time to study all the scriptures, especially all the Vedas, and therefore we should at least complete our study of the Gita, and then slowly we can move towards Bhagavatam, and from there, after finishing these two, then maybe we can try to like reverse engineer into the origin of it, like the Vedas and Upanishads, particularly the Upanishads. So it is important that all Hindus, especially, should at least finish studying the Gita, and not really wait for retirement age. So that is another misconception. So at least if we can finish studying the Gita, then we can think about the Vedas and Upanishads. So this is actually the stepping stone. The irony is that people who don't even know how many verses are there in the Gita, they don't even know how many chapters are there in the Gita, they are the ones who always talk about the Vedas. I mean, Krishna knows about our position in this Kali Yuga, and therefore he made it easy for us. So we should complete this basic prerequisite study before actually even thinking about the Vedas. But even from the bhakti point of view, the main purpose of Vedic study is to understand Krishna. Even there's a verse in chapter 15 itself where Krishna says that the main purpose of all the Vedas is to know him. So those who engage in Bhakti Yoga, they already know the Vedas, because they know that the ultimate aim is to attain devotional service to Krishna in the spiritual world. So the one who is in Krishna consciousness already knows the Vedas. Entanglement of this material world is compared here to a banyan tree. For one who is engaged in fruitive activities, he wanders from one branch to another, to another, to another. So this is about how this material world is compared to the banyan tree, and we are actually stuck or entangled in this material world, and we keep moving from one material body to another, and we are like always stuck in this incessant cycle of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi. So for one who is attached to this tree, there's no possibility of liberation. We are already entangled in this tree, and if we ourselves are attached, so it is such a situation where we don't even know that we are already entangled, but then we are actually even attached to this tree. So that is our miserable condition, the miserable condition of the conditioned soul. So for such conditioned souls, there is no possibility of liberation. If one can understand this indestructible tree of illusion, then one can get out of it. So first of all, we have to understand that we are entangled. We have to acknowledge the problem. So if we don't even know our current position, if we don't even know that we have a problem, then there's no possibility of working towards the solution. So for those who always jump to the Vedas without even knowing about the Gita, so first of all, it's important to understand the true meaning of this word Veda. Vedayati dharmam brahmam cha Vedaha. The purpose of the Vedas is to know about Dharma and Brahman, the Supreme Brahman. So we have actually seen this in the first part of our Ishopanishad series. So apart from the four main types of Vedas, Rig, Yajur, Sama, Atharva, each of those Vedas, they are also further subdivided into four components, namely Samhita, Brahmana, Aranyaka, and Upanishads. So they have very specific purposes, like the Samhita, Brahmana, Aranyakas, they belong to the Karma Kanda and Upasana Kanda, mostly consisting of rituals and sacrifices. Only the Upanishads belong to the Jnana Kanda, meaning the Upanishads actually convey the important knowledge that we need to know to liberate ourselves. And we also have this Prasthanatraya kind of taxonomy. So the most famous division of the scriptures, Shruti and Smriti, and we also have Nyaya Prasthana. So Smriti belongs to Smriti refers to the collection of they are often referred to as supplementary to the Shrutis, but the Smritis are actually the essence of all the Shrutis. The Shruti language, like especially the Upanishads, they are very cryptic, and even the commentaries of all the Acharyas, they are very terse. So it's quite difficult for laymen to understand the Shrutis because it is a very confidential knowledge, but the essence of the Shrutis are also conveyed through the Smritis. Even in Ramayana and Mahabharata, the essence of all the Vedas are there. And even if you look at the Mahabharata, the most important part is the Gita. So it is not like Smriti is a supplementary reading to the Shruti. The Smriti is actually the essence of the Shruti, which has been compiled in a way that is much easier for layman to understand. Otherwise, for those who really want to understand the Shrutis, they have to be they really have to engage in the task of Brahmanas about similar to how intensely the Brahmanas conduct their Vedic studies. But for us, we don't even have the time to study the Gita properly. So there's no need to always jump to the Vedas. So we just have to complete our study of the Gita, then move to Bhagavatam. And then later, for those who have the time, they can really look into studying the Upanishads like in depth. But the basic prerequisite study is to study the Gita because it contains the essence of all the Upanishads. So that is what we are also trying to do with our Ishopanishad study. So that is just the first Upanishad. I'm also planning to cover the other Upanishads to show the relationship between those Upanishads and the Gita. So we have also seen this taxonomy about how the main Upanishads, the 10 main Upanishads are located in the Vedas. So for each Veda, there are in all the branches of the Vedas, there are these some Brahmana, Aranyaka, and Upanishad sub-branches. So all the Upanishads that we see are actually, they belong to the particular branches of different Vedas. So each Upanishad belongs to the Shukla Yajur Veda and also Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. So even in Gita Mahatmya, it is stated that the Bhagavad Gita is the essence of all the Upanishads. So it is best for everyone to at least complete the basic prerequisite study of the Gita before jumping to the Vedas or Upanishads, because those are more complicated scriptures. Those are the more confidential knowledge. So if we don't even complete this basic study, then there's no point in jumping to the more confidential ones. The process of extrication, meaning disentanglement, to get out of the entanglement. So we should understand how to extricate ourselves from this entanglement, the material entanglement. Up to the 13th chapter, we have seen that devotional service to Supreme Lord is the best way. The basic principle of devotional service is detachment from material activities and attachment to the transcendental service of the Lord. So when we talk about engaging in bhakti, it doesn't merely mean that we have to give up everything, because it is impossible for embodied souls to act in such a way. Even in chapter 3 of the Gita, in 3.6, there's a verse which talks about mityachara, the person who acts as a pretender. For someone who simply decides to give up all activities in the name of detachment, such a person is known as a pretender. So the basic principle of devotional service is to detach from material activities and to attach to devotional service. But if we actually, if we are absorbed in Krishna consciousness, we can even transform our material activities into devotional service with the right consciousness. This has already been explained by Krishna himself in verse 8.7. Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu ma manusmare udyacha mai arpita mano buddhir mami vaishasi asamshaya. In this verse, Krishna tells Arjuna that to always remember him and perform his duty of fighting. If Krishna is actually telling Arjuna to always remember him and perform his duty of fighting, if he acts in such a way as how he has been instructed by Krishna, then he can surely attain Krishna in the end. So similarly, we also don't have to give up all our activities, like our material activities. If we always perform those activities in Krishna consciousness, then even that activity can be transformed into transcendental devotional service to the Lord. There's further explanation about the tree, the banyan tree. So it is also stated that the fruits of this tree represent the results of living activities, namely dharma, artha, kama, moksha, religion, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation. So if we remain, we are already entangled in this material tree, and if we remain attached to it, so we'll also develop further attachment towards the fruits of it, namely dharma, artha, kama, moksha, and even this so-called moksha further entangles, because only bhakti can give true liberation. So only if we are absorbed in bhakti, we will understand that our purpose is to always act as the eternal servants of Krishna. The trees on the bank reflect upon the water with their branches down and roots up. As mentioned in the verse, the tree of the material world, it has its roots upward. So we get to see this type of image of a tree when we look at the reflection which is formed on the surface of the water when we are actually standing on the bank. So this analogy simply means that this imperishable banyan tree, which represents the material world, is a reflection of the real tree of the spiritual world. So this material world is a reflection of the spiritual world. One who wants to get out of this material existence must know this tree thoroughly through analytical study. Then he can cut off his relationship with it. So as mentioned earlier, we have to first acknowledge the problem. We have to realize that we have a problem. Then we can work towards the solution. So this reflection is an exact replica. So the material world is actually an exact replica of the spiritual world, but it is a perverted reflection. The Prakriti is the external energy of the Supreme Lord, and the Purusha is the Supreme Lord himself. And also this material world is composed of the 24 raw ingredients, which we have seen in our session on Mahatattva. So these are the 24 elements: 5 karma indriyas, 5 jnana indriyas, mind, 5 sense objects, 5 panchama bhuta, plus intelligence, ego, and consciousness. This manifestation is material and it is temporary, meaning the tree of the material world, meaning the material world itself, is a reflection of the spiritual world. Since it is a reflection, therefore it's temporary. But the origin from which this reflection is formed, that origin is eternal, permanent. So this material world is temporary, but the spiritual world is eternal. So there are also explanation regarding this in chapter 8. The person who knows the Vedas, it is assumed that he knows how to cut off attachment to this material world. One who is attracted by the ritualistic formulas of the Vedas is attracted by the beautiful green leaves of the tree. He does not exactly know the purpose of the Vedas. The purpose of the Vedas, as disclosed by the personality of Godhead himself is to cut down this reflected tree and attain the real tree of the spiritual world. So even in chapter 2, Krishna talks about these Veda Varatas. Those who are too obsessed with the so-called Vedic knowledge, they are too attracted by the flowery words of the Vedas, which recommend various fruitive activities for elevation to heavenly planets, resultant good birth, power, and so forth, being desirous of sense gratification and opulent life. They say that there is nothing more than this. So, as we saw earlier, the Karma Kanda portions of the Vedic knowledge, Mita Brahmana branches, so they prescribe these fruitive activities which promise heavenly pleasures, but we know that such pleasures are also not permanent, will still be stuck in the same material world. So the true knowledge of the Vedas should actually enable one to realize that we have to liberate ourselves from this material world. Merely by going to the heavenly planets, that is not going to solve our problem. Also in 8.15, Krishna says, Maum Vetya Punarjanma, Dukkalayam Mashashvatam, Naptuanti Matmana Samsitim Paramam Gata. After attaining me, the great souls who are yogis in devotion never return to this temporary world which is full of miseries because they have attained the highest perfection. So Dukkalayam, this material world is Dukkalayam Ashvatam. It is called Ashvatam because it is temporary. Though it is temporary, it is real. The material world is real. So it is not like what the Mayavadis claim. They claim that this material world is not real, but it is real. It is just that it is temporary. So now the second verse of chapter 15. So this is meter 11. Anyone want to recite? Hare Krishna. Meter 11. Okay, I'll recite it. Ajaschaudvam prastastasya shaka guna pravalda vishya pravala Ajaschamulani anusantatani kamanubandini manushya loke. The branches of this tree extend downward and upward, nourished by the three modes of material nature. The two objects of the tree also has roots going down, and these are bound to the fruitive actions of human society. So this verse provides further explanation. So since this tree, the lower branches, there are human beings and even lower types of living entities. In the upper parts are the higher forms of living entities like the demigods. And this tree is nourished by the three modes of material nature. So as long as we are already entangled in this material tree, and as long as we remain attached to it, we'll keep cultivating the three modes of material nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance. But in order to attain liberation, we have to transcend these modes. So as long as we are attached to this tree, meaning as long as we are attached to this material world, we'll only be cultivating our material qualities. So we have to transcend the three modes, even beyond goodness, to achieve Shuddha Sattva or pure goodness. The twigs of the tree are considered to be the sense objects. The tips of the branches are the senses, which are attached to the enjoyment of different sense objects. The twigs are sound, form, touch, and other sense objects. after one enjoys the results of virtuous activities in the upper planetary systems, he comes down to this earth and renews his karma of fruitive activities for promotion. This planet of human beings is considered the field of activities. So as long as we are attached to this tree, the material world, we'll keep nurturing our material qualities, and we'll also always be engaged in fruitive activities. By doing so, even by engaging in the karma kanda activities prescribed in the Vedas, we can merely elevate ourselves to the heavenly planets, which do not guarantee any liberation. Even in the lower planetary systems, as we have seen in our previous sessions, even in those subterranean regions, those planets are actually even more materially opulent than the upper planetary systems. However, all these three worlds, they completely they actually prohibit us from attaining the eternal association with Krishna in the spirit. So even by going to the heavenly planets through the study of the Vedas, especially the Karma Kanda portions, the results of those activities are mentioned in 9.20 and 9.21. Those who study the Vedas and drink the Soma juice, seeking the heavenly planets, worship me indirectly, purified of sinful reactions. They take birth on the pious heavenly planet of Indra, where they enjoy godly delights. So in Swargaloka, under the leadership of Indra, there are so many heavenly pleasures. In fact, even in the subterranean regions, like in the Sutala planet, where Bali Maharaj resides, so he has actually been given the position that is almost equal to Indra in terms of the material opulence. But in all these places, wherever there's too much material opulence, it actually prohibits our cultivation of Krishna consciousness. When they have thus enjoyed vast heavenly sense pleasure and the results of their pious activities are exhausted, they return to this mortal planet again. Thus, those who seek sense enjoyment by adhering to the principle of the three Vedas achieve only repeated birth and death. So merely being obsessed with the Karma Kanda portions of the Vedas, they do not guarantee liberation. So those who are merely engaged in the study of these fruitive activities in the Vedas, they do not actually know the true purpose of the Vedas. So in our series on Bhagavata cosmology, we have seen this, especially in our discussion about the Bhumandal. So the Mount Meru is at the center of the Bhumandal, and Jambudvipa is there in the center, surrounded by the other Dvipas in the Saptadvipa. So these are the Saptadvipas. So Jambudvipa is divided into 9 Varshas, 9 tracts of land. And Bharata Varsha is known as the field of activities in the Bhumandal. In this, as mentioned in 9.21, which says the mortal planet, the middle planet. So even in this middle Bhumandal, Bharata Varsha is actually the field of activities, the field of fruitive activities, and all the other Varshas, they are actually the Bhauma Swarga regions. So as we know, there are 3 types of Swargas: the Divya Swarga in the upper planetary system, Bhauma Swarga are the heavenly regions within the Bhumandal itself, which are not accessible to us. And Bila Swarga refers to the materially opulent places in the lower planetary system. So in all these Varshas of Jambudvipa, there are the chief presiding deities. Though we are actually like stuck in this Bharatavarsha, which is the field of activities. It is not like a curse. It is actually a blessing as acknowledged by the demigods, because uh, uh, whether we it all depends on how we make the most out of it. Since the human form of life is the sublime position for spiritual realization, all the demigods in heaven speak in this way. How wonderful it is for these human beings to have been born in the land of Bharatavarsha. They must have executed pious acts of austerity in the past, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself must have been pleased with them. Otherwise, how could they engage in devotional service in so many ways? We demigods can only aspire to achieve human births in Bharatavarsha to execute devotional service, but these human beings are already engaged there. So, in the beginning of this chapter, we saw that we are stuck in this material world. It's not actually, it is not completely like a curse, because we still have attained this human form of life. And being in this Bharatavarsha is actually, it is also a blessing where we have the opportunity to be engaged in devotional service. This has been acknowledged by the demigods themselves. So it all depends on how we make use of this opportunity. A short life in the land of Bharatavarsha is preferable to a life achieved in Brahmaloka, meaning Satyaloka, for millions and billions of years, because even if one is elevated to Brahmaloka, he must return to repeated birth and death. Although life in the Bharatavarsha in a lower planetary system is very short, one who lives there can elevate himself to full Krishna consciousness and achieve the highest perfection, even in this short life, by fully surrendering unto the lotus feet of the Lord. Thus, one attains Vaikuntha Loka, where there is neither anxiety nor repeated birth in a material body. So again, the demigods and even Brahma himself, they all acknowledge our advantageous position in this Bhumandal. Though we belong to the Bhumandal, which is a lower planetary system, when viewed from the upper planetary systems, mainly the Satyaloka, but even they acknowledge the advantages that we have, especially with regards to how we can, we have the opportunities to engage in devotional service. So it all depends on how we make use of these opportunities. Bharatavarsha offers the proper land and circumstances in which to execute devotional service, which can free one from the results of jnana and karma. If one obtains a human body in the land of Bharatavarsha with clear sensory organs with which to execute the Sankirtan Yagya, but in spite of this opportunity, he does not take to devotional service, he is certainly like liberated forest animals and birds that are careless and are therefore again born by a hunter. So even in the upper planetary systems and the lower planetary systems, which may be materially more opulent with so many so-called sense pleasures, we are in this Bharatavarsha, which is the field of activities. So it all depends on us about how we are going to make use of the opportunities that has been provided to us. So we have the opportunities to be engaged in devotional service, and we can elevate ourselves straight to the spiritual world without even having to go through the upper planetary systems. So all these have been acknowledged by the demigods and even Brahma himself. So it all depends on how we make use of it, these opportunities. So though we are actually stuck in this material world, but still there is the promising opportunity for us to be engaged in devotional service. 15.3. The real form of this tree cannot be perceived in this world. No one can understand where it ends, where it begins, or where its foundation is. But with determination, one must cut down this strongly rooted tree with the weapon of detachment. Thereafter, one must seek that place from which, having gone, one never returns, and there surrender to that Supreme Personality of Godhead, from whom everything began and from whom everything has extended since time immemorial. So first of all, we have to, though it is difficult to understand about this tree, this material tree completely, we still have to make efforts to at least understand about our position of how we have been entangled in this material entanglement. And then with the weapon of detachment, we have to cut down the strongly rooted tree so that we can extricate ourselves from this entanglement. After disentangling ourselves, then you must seek that place from which, having gone, one never returns, meaning the spiritual world. The real form of this banyan tree cannot be understood in this material world. One cannot see how far the tree extends, nor can one see the beginning of this tree. Yet one has to find out the cause. So we cannot fully understand about this banyan tree because we have been taking births in this material world for innumerable times since time immemorial. So that is what is meant here, that we cannot really understand about the complete mystery of this banyan tree because we have been taking birth in so many material bodies before this, and if we don't utilize this rare opportunity of this human form of life, then there's a possibility of having to go through many other material bodies. So that's why it is important to at least understand our current position of how we are trapped in this material entanglement. So by searching in this way, meaning by discovering our identity, we can somehow relate ourselves to Brahma and then to Garbhodakasaya Vishnu. So if we understand the position, our position in this material world, then we know that by inquiring further, we know that Brahma in Satyaloka is the topmost in this material universe, and then above him is Garbhodakasaya Vishnu. Above Garbhodakasaya Vishnu is Mahavishnu. So by going that order through our so-called research work, we will find out that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, in Goloka Vrindavana is most. So at least from our current position, by being engaged in this spiritual inquiry, then we will current position and we will know how we are related to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. However, due to the mercy of our acharyas, we don't really have to do this so-called research work. The word research itself is defined as re plus search, meaning to search repeatedly. Since we, the Kali Jivas, we don't have the luxury of time to be engaged in this so-called research work. So we just have to follow the instructions of our acharyas and study their commentaries, their purpose, especially the purpose of Srila Prabhupada, to understand the knowledge. By doing that, we can actually save a lot of time and prevent, avoid any unnecessary wastage of time, because we don't really have that much time. So by understanding all these basics, then we will understand that the origin of this tree is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because the entire creation, whether it's the material world or the spiritual world, everything emanates from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So we have to understand this knowledge through the association of persons who are in knowledge of that Supreme Personality of Godhead. So we have to understand this knowledge through our bona fide sampradayas. Then one becomes gradually detached from this false reflection of reality. And by knowledge, one can cut off the connection and actually become situated in the real tree. So this banyan tree, which represents the material world, is the reflection, the perverted reflection of the real tree, that is the spiritual world. So if we understand our position in this temporary dukkhalayam, then we can cut off our entanglement in this material world, and we can endeavor to attain the real tree, that is the spiritual world. So Krishna is also mentioned in chapter 4 about the importance of accepting a spiritual master. That vidhi pranipatena pariprashnaya sevaya, learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master, inquire from him submissively, and render service unto him. The self-realized souls can impart knowledge unto you because they have seen the truth. Though this looks like a very simple verse, but the reality is that there are a lot of distortions which are still happening, because even recently I saw a video of some other spiritual master. He himself was a spiritual master, but he was answering a question saying the question, we really need a spiritual master to gain spiritual knowledge. So this master was answering that question, to which he replied by saying that you may choose to accept a spiritual master, or you can even do it on your own. Everything is within you, and blah blah blah. So this kind of this type of marketing strategy is employed by so many if it is a matter of choice, if we can actually choose whether or not to accept a spiritual master, then why should Krishna we must accept a spiritual master? Even the discourse of the itself started only when Arjuna accepted Krishna as his spiritual master. In Gita 2.7, Arjuna says, Kapanyadoyo padaswava prichamitam dharma samudacheta yastresha nistam bhuitanme shishyasteham shadimamtam prapannam. Arjuna surrenders to Krishna as his disciple, and he accepts Krishna as the spiritual master. Only from that point onwards, the actual discourse of the Gita starts. So, apart from that, even in this verse, Krishna himself says that we need a spiritual master to learn the truth. But still, even some so-called spiritual masters, they are trying to distort the actual teachings by saying that it is perfectly okay, you may choose to accept or not accept a spiritual master. The word asanga is very important because the attachment for sense enjoyment and lording it over the material nature is very strong. So asanga is to detachment by discussion of spiritual science based on authoritative scriptures, and one must hear from persons who are actually in knowledge. So it is not a matter of choice of whether we can actually decide whether to choose whether to accept a spiritual master or not. It is best to accept a bona fide spiritual master, or it is actually a matter of choice whether we want to further delude ourselves and remain entangled. As a result of such discussion in the association of devotees, one comes to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The first thing one must do is surrender to him. By surrendering, why is it important to surrender to Krishna? Because he is the origin of everything, from whom everything has emanated, whether it is the material world or the spiritual world. To gain the favor of that personality of Godhead, one has only to surrender, and this is a result of performing devotional service by hearing, chanting, etc. He is the cause of the extension of the material world. In 10.8, Krishna says, Aham Sarvasya Prabhava. I am the origin of everything. Therefore, to get out of the entanglement of the strong banyan tree, meaning the material world, one must surrender to Krishna, because the material world itself is described as an extension of the spiritual world, the perverted reflection of the spiritual world. So even to cross over this material existence, we need the mercy of Krishna, and that can be only obtained by surrendering to him. As soon as one surrenders to Krishna, one becomes detached automatically from this material extension. So that is also mentioned by Krishna in 7.14. Daivihesha gunamai maya durjaya mam evaye prapatyanti maya metam taranjiti. This divine energy of mind, meaning the material energy, consisting of the three modes of material nature, is difficult to overcome. But those who have surrendered unto me can easily cross beyond it. So, though it is difficult to cross over the ocean of material existence, Krishna is revealing the simplest way, that is to surrender to him. Also in 10.8, Krishna says, Aham sarvasya prabho matta sarvam pravartate iti matva vadanti ma buddha bhava samanvita. I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from me. The wise who perfectly know this engage in my devotional service and worship me with all their hearts. So in chapter 15, it starts with the discussion about the material world and how it is related to the spiritual world. So up to this point, we have seen that the material world is actually an extension or a perverted reflection of the spiritual world. However, both the material world and the spiritual world, they all originate from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. So only by understanding these basic stuff, only then we can progress in the right direction. So that's why even in this verse, it is Krishna says, the wise who perfectly know this. So the spiritual world itself is an emanation of Krishna's energy. He is superior internal energy, and the material world is a reflection of that superior spiritual energy. However, he is the source of everything. That's why it is important to surrender to him if we disentangle ourselves from this material entanglement. Then even in Bhagavatam 2.6.19, it is stated about the material world being 1/4 of the entire energy of the Supreme Lord, Ekapada Vibhuti, and the spiritual world is described as 3/4 of the Lord's energy, Tripada Vibhuti. Now in the 5th verse of chapter 15, Nirmana Moha Jirasanga Dosha Adhyatma Nitya Vinurutta Kama Dvandveni Mukta Sugadukka Samjen Gachanti Amuta Padam Tat. Those who are free from false prestige, illusion, and false association, who understand the eternal, who are done with material lust, who are freed from the dualities of happiness and distress, and who, unbewildered, know how to surrender unto the Supreme Person to attain that eternal kingdom. So in the first few verses, we saw how about the analogy of the banyan tree, which describes about the material world, and how we as conditioned souls, we are entangled in this material world. So once we understand our position of how we are entangled, then we have to cut down the entanglement and free ourselves. We also have to progress in the right direction by aiming for that ultimate destination. So that is only possible by surrendering to Krishna, and even to qualify ourselves, surrendering is just the first step, but to qualify ourselves to attain that ultimate destination, the spiritual world, so we need all these additional qualities like Nirmana Moha Jirasanga Dosha Adhyatma Nitya Vinurutta Kama Dvandveni Mukta Sugadukka Samyet. So being free from false prestige, illusion, and false association, being free from the dualities of happiness and distress. So by surrendering to Krishna, we can actually, and also by being engaged in devotees, we can these qualities which actually help to free ourselves from the material bondage gradually, and by help us to qualify ourselves to attain the spiritual world. Because the conditioned soul is puffed up, thinking himself Lord of material nature, difficult for him to unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, as we know, identity is that we are souls, part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, and we actually fell to be uh, controllers in this material world. So, because of that, uh, our state is that we have been so puffed with our tendencies to be the lord of this material nature. So that's why begin with surrendering. Then slowly we can get rid of all our negative attributes and cultivate the qualities that are necessary to qualify ourselves so that we can attain the spiritual world. When one is free from delusion caused by pride, he can begin the process of surrender. Pride is due to illusion. He has the foolish notion that he is the lord of the world. So it is because of our foolishness of trying to lord over this material nature that we are actually entangled in this material world. So if we can get rid of that, those negative attributes uh, which made us to land in this material world, then we begin the process of extrication from the world. So in Gita aspects of knowledge, so he begins by mentioning humility and pridelessness as the important aspects of knowledge. So in order to gain spiritual knowledge, need these qualities of humility and pridelessness. Only by having these, we can get rid of those negative attributes which made us to get entangled in this material world. One has to get out of this false notion that human society is the proprietor of this world. One has to cultivate knowledge of what is actually his own and what is actually not his own. When one has an understanding of things as they are, he becomes free from all dual conceptions, such as happiness, distress, success, loss, or profit loss. He becomes full in knowledge. Then it is possible for him to surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So it is also mentioned in verse 15.5, Dvandvaini Mukta, which means being freed from dualities. This material world is full of dualities, like happiness, distress. So as long as we are attached to this material world, we will also remain attached to all these dualities. And that's why we always have to suffer dualities like happiness, distress, success, failure. So as long as we are stuck here, we'll always be experiencing these miseries. So this contrary to the fact that we are originally parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord, who is Satchidananda Vigraha. He is the personification of eternal knowledge and eternity, knowledge and bliss. So our original nature is to be in bliss always, but due to our foolishness of trying to lord over this material nature, we are stuck in this material world and we are forced to go through all these flickering experiences of pain and pleasure, success, failure, profit, loss. So even in Gita 2:14, says matras prashas tu kanteya sidosna shudukara agama payino nityas tam titikshasva bharata. The non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress and their disappearance in due course are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception. One must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. We are stuck in this condition of having to tolerate these dualities like winter, summer, happiness, distress due to our desire to enjoy material sense gratification. And only if we detach ourselves from these tendencies of wanting to enjoy these material sense gratification, only then we can slowly liberate ourselves from these dualities. Also in 5.22, Krishna says, an intelligent person does not take part in the sources of misery, which are due to contact with the material senses. O son of Kunti, such pleasures have a beginning and an end, and so the wise man does not delight in them. So when we talk about these dualities, the material dualities, whether it's success, failure, profit, loss, or happiness and distress, all these dualities, they are always like flickering. They have a beginning and an end. So if we are happy today, tomorrow we are going to be in distress, and after being in distress for some time, we may experience happiness again. So as long as we are stuck in this material world, we are going to be we will be subject to all these dualities. So only if we sincerely make attempts to liberate ourselves from this material bondage, then slowly we can even free ourselves from these dualities. And in 15.6, there's this description about the spiritual world. Natat bhasyate suryo na shashanko na pavaka yad gatva na nivartante tad dhamma paramam mama. That supreme abode of mind is not illumined by the sun or moon, nor by fire or electricity. Those who reach it never return to this material world. So this description, similar description and comparison is also given in chapter 8. In 8.16, Krishna describes all the material world. From the highest planet in the material world down to the lowest, all are places of misery. So this verse 8.16, Krishna speaks this verse right after 8.15, in which he talks about Dukkhalayam Ashashvatam. Krishna says that the material world is Dukkhalayam Ashashvatam. Then he further describes that the entire material universe, whether it's the upper, middle, or lower planetary system, all are places of misery, because a repeated birth and death take place in all these three lokas. But one who attains to my abode, O son of Kunti, never takes birth again. Then there are descriptions about how the day of Brahma is calculated. So at the beginning of Brahma's day, all living entities become manifest from the unmanifest state, and thereafter, when the night falls, they are merged into the unmanifest again. So this refers to the switching of states between the unmanifest and manifest. When the material world is in the unmanifested state, it is called pradhana. When it becomes manifest, then it is called prakriti. So during the day of Brahma, prakriti becomes manifest. Then when it is unmanifest, during the night of Brahma, the living entities also become manifest. Then the cycle continues throughout the life cycle of Brahma. Again and again, when Brahma's day arrives, all living entities come into being, and with the arrival of Brahma's night, they are helplessly annihilated. So this is the temporary flickering nature of the material world. So that's why Krishna says Dukkhalayam Ashashvatam, because it is a temporary world. So even the material world, which has been described as a perverted reflection of the spiritual world, in the previous verses. So the reflection is always temporary, but the original source, which is the spiritual world, is eternal. So that's what Krishna describes in 8.20. Yet there is another and unmanifest nature, which is eternal and is transcendental to this manifested and unmanifested matter. It is supreme and is never annihilated. When all in this world is annihilated, that part remains as it is. So the material world always keeps switching between the manifest state and unmanifest state. So it is temporary, but the spiritual world is eternal because it stays as it is, regardless of whether the material world becomes manifest or unmanifest. So in 8.21, Krishna says, Avyaktakshara iti uttas tammao paramam gatim yam praptya nanatante taddama paramuma. So even this verse ends with the similar pada like in 15.6 taddama paramuma. So in these verses, Krishna talks about how the spiritual world is supreme of all of Krishna's creations, whether it is the spiritual world or the material world. The spiritual world is the supreme or the ultimate destination, that which the Vedantists describe as unmanifest and infallible, that which is known as the supreme destination, that place from which, having attained it, one never returns. That is my supreme abode, Taddama Paramamama. So in the purport, there are descriptions about the entire spiritual world. Krishna Loka or Goloka Vrindavana, the peak or the topmost region of the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, there's no need of sunshine, moonshine, fire, or electricity, because all the planets are self-luminous. The shining effulgence of all those planets, called Vaikunthas, constitute the shining sky known as the Brahmajyoti. Even in the cover of Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada has given these descriptions about how the spiritual world consists of Goloka Vrindavana, and how the effulgence of this, the bodily effulgence of Krishna lights up even Goloka and also all the innumerable Vaikuntha planets. So these descriptions are also available in the cover pages of Bhagavatam. So that effulgence is known as Brahmajyoti. Part of that shining effulgence is covered by the Mahatattva, the material world. So the Mahatattva or material world is devoid of this effulgence. So this Mahatattva or material world is that part which does not receive the shining effulgence of the spiritual world. So from the Bhakti perspective, darkness is always regarded as ignorance. So since we are trapped in that dark spot of Mahatattva, so we are also in ignorance of the spiritual world. The major portion of that shining sky is full of spiritual planets, which are called Vaikunthas, chief of which is Goloka Vrindavana. So apart from Goloka Vrindavana, which is the HQ of the spiritual world, there are also many other innumerable Vaikuntha planets. So there are several verses which talk about Goloka, especially in Brahma Samhita. Ananda Chinmaya Rasa Pratibha Vitavis Avirja Eva Nija Rupa Taya Kalabi Goloka Eva Nivasati Akilatma Bhuto Govinda Madi Purusham Tamam Bajami. I worship Govinda, the primal Lord, residing in his own realm, Goloka, with Radha resembling his own spiritual figure, the embodiment of the ecstatic potency possessed of the 64 artistic activities, in the company of her confidantes, Sakis, embodiments of the extensions of her bodily form, permeated and vitalized by his ever blissful spiritual rasa. So this is one verse which describes Goloka particularly. Also in 5.43, it talks about the hierarchy of how Goloka is the topmost and Devi Dhamma is the lowermost region. Lowest of all is located Devi Dhamma, the mundane world, the material world. Above it is Mahesha Dhamma, abode of Mahesha. Above Mahesha Dhamma is Hari Dhamma, and above them all is Krishna's own realm named Goloka. I adore the primal Lord Govinda, who has allotted their respective authorities to the rulers of these created realms. So we are in Devi Dhamma, the material world. Above that is Mahesha Dhamma. Hari Dhamma refers to the region of all the innumerable Vaikuntha planets, and Goloka is above the Vaikuntha region. So Krishna he eternally resides in Goloka, particularly Goloka Vrindavana, because even the topmost Goloka region consists of Vrindavana, Mathura, and Dwarka Dhama. So he resides in his Swayam Rupa in Goloka Vrindavana, and that Swayam Rupa is the main source for all the other expansions, through which he also resides in all the other Dhammas. So all these are his personal expansions, and he eternally resides in all these different Dhammas through his innumerable expansions. However, his Swayam Rupa, the original source, originates from Goloka Vrindavana. So even in our Tuesday Bhagavatam class, we saw descriptions about the 16,000 queens of Krishna in Dwaraka. So even his Prabhava Prakasha forms, his 16,000 expansions, they also emanate from this Swayam Rupa. So through all these personal expansions, so even in Dwaraka Dhama, Krishna personally resides in all those 16,000 palaces. So from Goloka, in the Goloka region, there's also this Adi Chaturvyuha, the first Chaturvyuha division. And from Adi Shankarshana, Adi Shankarshana becomes the source for the expansions which are formed in the Vaikuntha region. So from Goloka, Adi Shankarshana, all the Narayana forms are all the Narayana forms of Vaikuntha originate from Adi Shankarshana in Goloka, and there's also this Dvitiya Chaturyuha, the secondary Chaturyuha. So there's also a secondary Shankarshan expansion, which becomes the source for the incarnations in Devi Dhamma or the material world. So in the spiritual world, the term used is expansions. But when it comes to the material world, we say avatars. Even in Bhagavatam, the 3rd chapter of Bhagavatam, it is titled Krishna, the source of all incarnations. So the title is incarnations or avatars because it talks about the avatars that descended to the material world. So all the 22 avatars or incarnations described in the 3rd chapter of Bhagavatam, they all refer to the avatars which descended to the material world. So they have all originated from the Dvitiya Chaturyuha, particularly the Dvitiya Shankarshana. So from that spark, all the Purusha avatars and the other categories of avatars are formed. As long as a living entity remains in this dark material world, so dark because it is devoid of the Brahma Jyoti, so it is like isolated, a dark spot. So the living entity in his conditional life, he remains in his conditional life, but as soon as he reaches the spiritual sky, he becomes liberated. In his conditional life, the living entity considers himself to be the lord of this material world. But in his liberated state, he enters into the spiritual kingdom and becomes an associate of the Supreme Lord. There he enjoys eternal bliss, eternal life, and full of knowledge. So contrary to our condition in this material world, once we elevate ourselves to the spiritual world, we can experience eternal bliss compared to the dualities of happiness and distress that we experience in this material world. So that's why it is important to realize the kind of mess that we are in right now, because our original identity is that we are always meant to be in eternal bliss, but due to our foolishness, we are now trapped in these material dualities. So he should desire to transfer himself to that eternal world and extricate himself from this false reflection of reality. For one who is too much attached to this material world, it's very difficult to cut that attachment. But if he takes to Krishna consciousness, there is a chance of gradually becoming detached. One cannot become detached from the attraction of the material world simply by dressing himself in saffron cloth. He must become attached to the devotional service of the Lord. Devotional service, as described in the 12th chapter, is the only way to get out of this false representation of the real tree. Meaning, that's the only way to disentangle ourselves from this material world. In chapter 14 talks about the contamination of all kinds of processes by the material nature because of due to the material modes of nature. Only devotional service is purely transcendental. So even our activities which are always influenced by the three modes of material nature, they can only be purified by being engaged in devotional service. So only devotional service could elevate us towards transcendence, to transcend the modes. So even in chapter 14, though the chapter itself is meant to talk about the three modes of material nature, but the last two concluding verses talk about how we can actually transcend the modes. Mamchayo vicharena bhakti yogena sevati sagunan samati jaitan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. One who engages in full devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman. So what do we do after transcending the modes? And I am the basis of the impersonal Brahman, which is immortal, imperishable, and eternal, and is the constitutional position of ultimate happiness. So once we transcend the modes, we should also aim to attain the constitutional position of ultimate happiness, that is the spiritual world. The words Paramam Mama are very important here. All the creation, whether it's the material world or spiritual world, they are all part of Krishna's creations. But the word Paramam Mama means that the spiritual world is the ultimate. The Katha Upanishad also confirms that in the spiritual world, there's no need of sunshine, moonshine. There's no need of sunshine, moonshine, or stars. Na tatra suryo bhati na chandra tarakam. There's also a very similar verse in Katha Upanishad 2:15, which is very similar to the description in 15.6, because the spiritual world is completely illuminated by the effulgence from the body of the Supreme Lord. So there's no need for the sun or moon there. That supreme abode can be achieved only by surrender and by no other means. 15.7 Vamivamsu Jivaloke Jivabhuta Sanatana Manasasthani Prakrishthani Karshati. The living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. So this is a very important verse, which completely demolishes the propaganda of Mayavadis who talk about merging with the Supreme. the identity of the living being is clearly given in this verse. The living entity is the fragmental part, eternally fragmented part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. The living entity is eternally living Lord manifests and expands himself in innumerable expansions, of which the primary expansions are called Vishnu Tattva, and the secondary expansions are called living entities or Jiva Tattvas. So all these expansions are fragmented. As we saw earlier, even in beginning from the Swayam Rupa of Krishna in Goloka Vrindavana, there are further expansions. So even the primary expansions of Krishna called the Vishnu Tattvas, even they are fragmented expansions. And then in the Devi Dhamma or material world, we as the Jiva Tattvas, we are also fragmented expansions. And all these are eternally fragmented expansions. It's not like we were cut down from the original source and then we became fragmented and then we can merge again. No, we remain eternally fragmented, meaning we have our eternal personal identity, even after liberation. So in one of our previous sessions titled the Supreme Absolute Truth, so we saw about how Krishna has these 64 prominent qualities. It is not that Krishna only has 64 qualities. These 64 qualities are the most prominent qualities of Krishna. So the Jiva Tattva can have up to 50 qualities. So the topmost Jiva Tattva, that is Lord Brahma, he can have the maximum of 50 qualities. Beyond Brahma, the topmost Jiva Tattva is Shiva Tattva. So he can have up to 55. Vishnu Tattva, the Narayana forms, they can have up to 60 qualities, but only Krishna has all 64 qualities. So he has 4 more. So Krishna is the origin of all the smaller expansions. So the primary expansions are the Vishnu Tattvas, and then below that are the Shiva Tattva and Jiva Tattvas. So we actually belong to this category of Jiva Tattvas, but the topmost Jiva Tattva is Brahma. So that's why only he can attain up to these 50 qualities. If we can develop that much qualities, we can attain the position of Brahma. So all these tattvas, they are all eternally fragmented. So which is completely contradictory to the propaganda of Mayavadis. Also in Brahma Samhita, talks about the various avatars, which are expansions of Krishna, like Rama, Narasimha, and Vamana. His subjective portions as the avatars appear from Vaikuntha, and his own form, Krishna, manifests himself with Raja in this world from Goloka. The underlying sense is that Krishna Chaitanya, identical with Krishna himself, also brings about by his appearance the direct manifestation of Godhead himself. So between Goloka and Vaikuntha region is Ayodhya Dham. So all these various expansions, even the Vishnu Tattvas themselves, they are eternally fragmented. So even Ayodhya Dham is always eternal, it always exists, just like Goloka Dham. So in all these various dhams in the spiritual world itself, Krishna still remains eternally fragmented in all his Vishnu Tattvas. Then in the lower regions, we as Jiva Tattvas, we have also originated from Krishna, but we also remain eternally fragmented. So similarly, the separated expansions of living entities have their identities. Every living entity as an individual soul has his personal individuality and a minute form of independence. by misuse of that independence, one becomes a conditioned soul. And by proper use of that independence, he is always liberated. So we are here in this material world as conditioned souls because we have actually misused our independence. In his liberated state, he is freed from this material condition. In his conditioned life, he is dominated by the material modes of nature. As a result, he has to struggle very hard to maintain his existence in the material world. The living entities, not only human beings, the cats, dogs, but even greater controllers like the demigods, they are all parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord. So apart from ourselves as Jiva Tattvas, even the Vishnu Tattva and Shiva Tattva are also part and parcels of Swayam Bhagavan, the Swayam Rupa of Krishna. The word Karshati, struggling very hard, is very significant, especially for us, the conditioned souls. So our position is like shackled by iron chains. But when the conditioned soul is liberated, the material covering perishes and our original spiritual body will manifest itself in its individual capacity. So now our original identity, our original transcendental body is covered by this material covering. When we are liberated, we will regain our original identity. When a living entity gives up this material embodiment and enters into the spiritual world, he revives his spiritual body, and in his spiritual body, he can see the Supreme Personality of Godhead face to face. So, from the Smriti, it is understood, Vasanti Yatra Purusha Sarve Vaikunta Murtayaha. In the spiritual planets, everyone lives in bodies featured like the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So there's also this Sarupya Mukti, meaning we can even attain liberation in such a way where we gain identical rupa. We gain the a form that is similar to the Vaikunta form, something similar to the 400 Narayana form. So as far as bodily construction is concerned, there is no difference between the part and parcel living entities and the expansions of Vishnu Murti. In other words, at liberation, the living entity gets a spiritual body by the grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So once we attain liberation, we can even attain that transcendental body which resembles the residence of Vaikuntha. The words Mamivamsa, fragmental parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord, are also very significant. Fragmental portion of the Supreme Lord is not like some material broken part. In chapter 2 of the Gita, in 2.25 or something, it is stated that the soul cannot be cut, the spirit cannot be cut into pieces. So similarly, all the various expansions, whether it is the Vishnu Tattvas or Jiva Tattvas, are all eternally fragmented. So it is not like they were cut and then can be joined again later, like the theory of merging propagated by Mayavadis. So that's why in this verse 15.7, it clearly states that we as the Jiva Tattvas, we are eternally fragmented. So even after liberation, even after attaining Vaikuntha, we will still remain as individuals with our own personal form. So the living entity, being the fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, is qualitatively one with the Lord, just as parts and parcels of gold are also gold. 15.8 Shariram Yadornoti Yachapi Utkamati Shara Great Vaitani Samayati Vayurgandani Vashat. The living entity in the material world carries his different conceptions of life from one body to another. As the air carries aromas, thus he takes one kind of body and again quits it to take another. Here the living entity is described as Ishvara, the controller of his own body. If he likes, he can change body to a higher grade, and if he likes, he can move to a lower class. So the fact that we have attained this precious human form of life proves that we have actually endeavored to deserve this precious form. If we take it for granted, then we are likely to get a lower form in the next birth. At the time of death, the consciousness he has created will carry him on to the next type of body. The present body and present activities are the background of his next body. So we have actually endeavored to attain this precious form. So we have to, we should not take this for granted. We should endeavor to attain the ultimate goal by making proper use of this precious human form of life. As the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. So a person is not bewildered by such a change. As a person puts on new garments, giving up old ones, the soul similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless one. So these cycles are likely to continue as long as we do not qualify ourselves to attain the ultimate goal. So only if we seriously take up to Krishna consciousness and intensify our sadhana, then we can attain the ultimate goal. So the subtle body which carries the conception of the next body develops another body in the next life. This process of transmigrating from one body to another and struggling while in the body is called karshati, or struggle for existence. So our subtle body, which consists of mind, intelligence, false ego, this subtle body will keep carrying our consciousness from one body to another. So the kind of consciousness that we develop will prepare our next body. So it is not that it only happens towards the end. The kind of consciousness that we have developed at the end of our life is what we have been practicing throughout the entire period of our life. So if we remain in Krishna consciousness throughout this life, then towards the end of our life, we can develop the kind of consciousness that would enable us to attain our transcendental body. So it has also been mentioned by Krishna in 8.15. Antakale chamameva smaran muktva kalaivaram ya prayati samadbhavam yati nashtyarcha samshaya. And whoever at the end of his life quits his body remembering me alone, at once attains my nature. Of this there's no doubt. Unfortunately, this verse is being distorted even by some of the initiated devotees, because they are trying to propagate this theory that just because Krishna is saying that you have to remember me at the end of your life, it doesn't mean that we can simply try to remember Krishna at the end of our life and indulge in all sorts of nonsense during our lifetime. We can only develop the ability to remember Krishna at the end of our life if we practice Krishna consciousness throughout our life. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, O son of Kunti, that state he will attain without fail. So it is evident from the case of Jada Bharat, regardless of his practice, his sadhana, due to certain flaws, he had to take the birth of a deer. But in the case of Ajamila, he was slightly fortunate due to the power of the holy name. But it was not like he was simply given that license or ticket to Goloka. He still had to, after getting the second chance, he still had to complete his practice of Krishna consciousness to actually get the ticket to Vaikuntha. 15.9. Strotam chakshus prasnam cha rasanam gravanam cha adhishtaya manaschayam vishan upasevati. The living entity, thus taking another gross body, obtains a certain type of ear, eye, tongue, nose, and sense of touch, which are grouped above the mind. He thus enjoys a particular set of sense objects. So if we develop the kind of consciousness which is centered around material sense gratification, then we are likely to develop a certain type of material body, which will also enable us to enjoy that particular type of sense gratification. For example, there are people who proudly proclaim that they are pure non-vegetarians. So for such people, they will develop such senses which enable them to enjoy raw non-veggie. If the living entity adulterates his consciousness with the qualities of cats and dogs, in his next life, he gets a cat or dog body and enjoys. So those who proudly claim to be non-vegetarians, so they will get that type of body which enables them to enjoy their desired food stuff. Consciousness is originally pure like water, but if we mix water with a certain color, it changes. But consciousness is changed according to the association of the material qualities. Real consciousness is Krishna consciousness. Though our original identity is that of a spiritual nature, uncontaminated, due to association with this material world, it has become contaminated. So it is incumbent upon us to purify our consciousness if we are serious about attaining the spiritual world. If his consciousness is adulterated by some type of material mentality, in the next life, he gets a corresponding body. So this corresponding body could be any type of the 84 lakh material bodies. So as we know, there are 84 lakh material bodies or apartments. Now we have obtained this prestigious apartment of this human body. If we don't appreciate it and if we don't make the most out of it, then we are likely to get other lower grade apartments in the next in our next life. So the last verse, Utkramatam Srimvapi Bunjanava Gunanitam Vimodananu Pashanti Pashanti Nyan Chachusha. The foolish cannot understand how a living entity can quit his body, nor can they understand what sort of body he enjoys under the spell of the modes of nature. But one whose eyes are trained in knowledge can see all this. The word Jnana Chakshusha is very significant. Without knowledge, one cannot understand how a living entity leaves his present body, nor what form of body he's going to take in the next life, nor even why he's living in a particular type of body. This requires a great amount of knowledge understood from Bhagavad Gita and similar literatures heard from bona fide spiritual master. But even before starting this study of scriptures, there should be that Brahma Jignasa moment from where we start our spiritual inquiry. Only when we start our spiritual inquiry, we'll be endeavoring to complete these scriptural studies. Only with this knowledge, we can understand the kind of mess that we are in right now. Only when we acknowledge the problem, only then we can work towards the solution. Persons who are everlastingly fooled by lust and desire lose all power to understand their change of body and their stay in a particular body. They cannot comprehend it. So for those who are still deluded to the extent that they cannot even understand that they are entangled in this material world, so such people, they don't have the Jnana Chakshu to see things as they are. So as far as this spiritual knowledge is concerned, it is meant for all jivas, all living entities. In the introduction section to Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada highlights these 5 main topics of the Gita: Ishvara, Jiva, Prakriti, Kala, Karma. So here Jiva refers to all the living entities, not just for human beings. However, only we as the human beings and even the demigods and other higher forms, only we have been blessed with the required consciousness to understand what is the real consciousness, that is Krishna consciousness. So that's why we should not take this human form of life for granted. So for those who have developed spiritual knowledge, they can see that the spirit is different from the body. So only that would be the first first step towards understanding the true spiritual knowledge, to understand that we are spirit souls and not the material body. A person in such knowledge can understand how the conditioned living entity is suffering in this material existence. Only when we realize our true identity, only then we can understand that we are suffering in this material world. So only when we have that realization, then we can work towards the solution. They should come out of it and be Krishna conscious and liberate themselves to transfer to the spiritual world. So this should be the ideal mission of all conditioned souls, especially all human beings. So only by developing the proper consciousness, we can go to Goloka, back to Godhead. So we have covered this first part of chapter 15, Puruṣottama Yoga, the first 10 verses. In our next session on Tuesday, we'll cover the remaining 10 verses. So that's all for today. Thank you. Any questions or comments?
It's okay, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I'll see you all on Tuesday for the next session. Thank you.